Marcus, Max, Delaney leaned against the bulkhead of the station's core module, staring at the worn blueprint in his hands. His father had given it to him years ago, a simple sketch of a self-sustaining habitat drawn in ballpoint pen on a sheet of yellowing notebook paper. As a boy, Max had thought it was the most amazing thing he'd ever seen. Even now, as a seasoned engineer, the crude drawing still inspired him. He folded it carefully and slid it back into the pocket of his utility jacket before turning to his partner. "Jacob," he called, "we need to double-check the alignment on the main support struts before we start sealing the outer hull. If that frame shifts even a millimeter under pressure, we're done for." Jacob Garrity, his longtime friend and fellow engineer, looked up from the console where he'd been running simulations. "Relax, Max. I've gone over this at least 3 times. It's solid. And I'm going to check it a 4th, Max replied, his voice firm. "If this place is going to last more than a week out here, we need to be absolutely sure." Jacob sighed, wiping his hands on his grease-stained coveralls. "Fine. But if it's still perfect after you check it, you owe me a drink. Not one of those synth beers either, a real one." "You're on," Max said with a grin. "Let's get to it." The station, a modular habitat they'd been assembling piece by piece over the past month, was perched precariously on the edge of an asteroid cluster deep in uncharted space. The Allied Galactic Expeditionary Corps had sent them out here to prove that a fully operational outpost could be built from scratch far from Earth's supply lines. For Max, it was a dream assignment. For Jacob, it was a chance to push engineering limits. Together, they were determined to make it work. They spent the next several hours inspecting the struts, running stress tests, and arguing over minor discrepancies in the structural analysis. As they worked, Max couldn't help but marvel at how much progress they'd made. The core module was up and running, the life support systems were stable, and the skeleton of the outer hull was nearly complete. Soon, they'd move on to the interior compartments, living quarters, laboratories, and a small hydroponic garden. If everything went according to plan, this place wouldn't just be a temporary shelter, it would be a thriving, self-sufficient home. Jacob leaned against a support beam, catching his breath. "You know, when we first signed up for this mission, I thought it would be all advanced tech and automated construction. Turns out it's just a lot of manual labor." "Good old-fashioned elbow grease," Max said, clapping Jacob on the shoulder. "Nothing builds character like putting the pieces together by hand." Jacob chuckled. "I think my character is built enough. But I'll admit it's starting to feel like we're making something real here." They shared a moment of quiet satisfaction before Max's handheld scanner beeped. He frowned, pulling it out of his pocket. "What's that? Trouble?" Jacob asked, straightening. "Not sure," Max said, examining the readout. "It's a faint signal, could be interference, or maybe a piece of old equipment that's still active out there. I'll run a diagnostic." The signal wasn't coming from their station or any known satellite. It was faint, irregular, and definitely not from the Ajax equipment. Curious, Max adjusted the scanner's parameters and traced the source to a nearby asteroid cluster. He turned to Jacob, his expression serious. "We should check this out," he said. "Do we really have time for a side mission?" Jacob asked. "We've still got a ton of work to do." "If it's just interference, it won't take long," Max replied. "And if it's something else, we need to know what we're dealing with. We can't afford any surprises out here." Jacob hesitated, then nodded. "All right, let's go. But if this turns out to be a wild goose chase, you're the one who gets to explain it to command." They suited up, boarding one of the station's small utility craft. The trip was short, and as they approached the source of the signal, Max's scanner picked up a ship, an old, battered craft half hidden in the shadow of a large asteroid. Its hull was scorched and pitted, and the faint hum of its emergency beacon was the only thing keeping it from being lost forever in the void. "Looks like someone's in trouble," Max said, his voice tight. "We need to dock." Jacob nodded, his usual joking demeanor replaced by focus. "Let's do it. But stay sharp, no telling who or what's inside." They docked carefully, the utility craft's automated systems guiding them in. As the airlock cycled open, they stepped inside the derelict ship. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of burnt wiring. Panels hung loosely from the walls, and sparks occasionally jumped from exposed circuits. In the middle of it all was a figure slumped against the bulkhead, a creature unlike anything they'd seen in person before. She was humanoid but clearly not human. Her skin was a deep, mottled green, and faint scales caught the light. Her eyes were large, slitted like a reptile's, and they blinked slowly as she looked up at them. She wore a form-fitting jumpsuit that had seen better days, and a small patch on her sleeve bore a symbol Max didn't recognize. She was conscious, but barely. Max knelt beside her. "Hey, can you hear me? We're here to help." Her voice was a low rasp, barely audible. Help, you're not supposed to be here. Neither are you, Jacob muttered under his breath. She doesn't look like one of ours. Max shot him a warning glance. Let's get her stabilized first, then we'll figure out the rest. They brought her back to the station, carrying her carefully aboard the utility craft and hooking her up to their emergency medical equipment. As they worked, she slowly regained her strength, though her movements remained sluggish and her speech fragmented. Max and Jacob exchanged glances. They trained for all sorts of emergencies, but rescuing an alien was definitely not in the manual. What do you think? Jacob asked quietly. She doesn't look like one of the known species we've had contact with. No, Max replied, his tone equally low. But that doesn't matter right now. She's alive, and we're going to keep it that way. They set her up in a secure compartment within the station, giving her a chance to recover. Over the next few days, she grew stronger. Her name, as they learned, was Velik. She came from a species called the Adar, a reptilian people known for their advanced communal societies. Her ship had been caught in a gravitational anomaly, and her escape pod had drifted far from her original course. The rest of her crew had been rescued, but she'd been left behind, until Max and Jacob found her. Though communication was initially difficult, they gradually broke through the language barrier. Velik spoke haltingly at first, but with time, she began to share more about her people and the circumstances that had brought her to this remote sector. In turn, Max and Jacob told her about Earth, their mission, and the challenges they faced building a habitable station in the middle of nowhere. As they spent more time together, they developed a tentative bond. Velik was cautious, but she appreciated their efforts to help her. She even offered insights on their construction projects, pointing out structural weaknesses and suggesting alternative materials that improved the station's durability. Max and Jacob, though wary of the Ajax's strict regulations on alien contact, found themselves increasingly valuing her presence. One evening, as they reviewed their latest progress on the station's power systems, Jacob leaned back in his chair. I never thought I'd say this, but having her around isn't so bad. She's sharp. Yeah, Max agreed, his gaze drifting toward the compartment where Velik rested. We might actually make this work with her help. Jacob raised an eyebrow. Just remember, if this blows up in our faces, you're the one who gets to explain it to command. Max smiled faintly. Fair enough, but I have a feeling we're going to be just fine. They turned back to their work, the faint hum of the station's systems the only sound. In the cold depths of space, against all odds, they were building something real, and perhaps something lasting. You think she's going to pull through? Jacob asked, his voice low as he leaned against the station's observation window. Max, busy repairing a cracked coolant line, didn't look up. She's tougher than she looks. If she made it this far on her own, I'd say she's got a good chance. Fair enough, Jacob replied, though his tone was doubtful. Still, having her here, it's a risk. You know that, right? I know, Max said evenly. But leaving her out there wasn't an option. What was I supposed to do? Just walk away? Jacob crossed his arms, his brow furrowed. No, you did the right thing. I don't know. Something feels off about all this. Max set his tool down and turned to face him. Look, I get it. It's not like I planned for this either. But she's not some hostile invader. She's just trying to survive, same as us. Besides, she's been nothing but cooperative. Sure, Jacob said, though he didn't sound convinced. I just hope you know what you're doing. They both glanced toward the makeshift medical bay where Velik was resting. Over the past few days, she'd begun to recover her strength. She still spent most of her time lying down, but her color had improved, and her voice was no longer just a whisper. Max had spoken with her several times, slowly piecing together her story. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that she posed no threat. Jacob, on the other hand, remained cautious. I don't trust easily, Max. You know that. I need more than just a sad story before I'm ready to let my guard down. And that's fine, Max said, picking up his wrench again. But until we have a reason not to trust her, let's give her the benefit of the doubt. It's the least we can do. Later that day, as Max worked on the station's environmental controls, Velik surprised him by stepping into the maintenance bay. She moved slowly, still weak, but her gaze was sharp. "You're up," Max said, setting his tools aside. "Shouldn't you be resting?" "I've rested enough," Velik replied, her voice steady. "I can't just sit around while you work." Jacob entered the room just in time to hear her. He frowned, leaning on the doorway. "And what exactly do you plan on doing? This is a human station, built with human systems. Not exactly your specialty, is it?" Velik met his gaze without flinching. "Perhaps not, but I understand structural mechanics. I can spot weaknesses and suggest adjustments." "Suggest adjustments," Jacob repeated, his tone skeptical. "And how do we know your adjustments won't lead to a hull breach?" "Jacob," Max cut in, his voice firm. "Enough." "What?" Jacob shrugged. "I'm just saying, maybe we shouldn't hand her the toolkit just yet." Velik held up her hands, her expression calm. "I don't need to touch anything. I can observe and advise. If you're not comfortable with that, I'll keep my distance. But I'm not here to cause trouble." Max nodded, then turned to Jacob. "She's offering to help. Let's see what she's got." "Your call," Jacob said, crossing his arms. "But I'm watching her every move." Over the next several hours, Velik observed their work, occasionally pointing out stress points in the framework or suggesting more efficient ways to distribute power through the grid. At first, Jacob grumbled, muttering under his breath about unsolicited advice. But gradually he began to listen. Some of her suggestions proved surprisingly effective, saving them both time and effort. By the end of the shift, Jacob's skepticism had softened, though he'd never admit it out loud. "Not bad," he said grudgingly. "Still not sure I trust you, but not bad." Velik nodded. "Thank you. I'm only trying to contribute. You have my word that I mean no harm." Max clapped Jacob on the shoulder. "See? Wasn't so hard to give her a chance, was it?" Jacob muttered something under his breath, but a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Over the next few days, Velik continued to assist them. She still spent much of her time recovering, but whenever she had the energy, she joined them in the maintenance bay or the control room. Her presence became less of a novelty and more of a routine. Max and Jacob started to see her not as an outsider, but as part of the team, an unconventional part, but a part nonetheless. One evening, as the three of them sat in the observation lounge, Jacob finally broke the silence. "So, Velik, you mentioned before that your people value community. Must be hard being out here on your own." "It is," Velik admitted. "The Adar rarely travel alone. We rely on each other for strength and guidance. Being separated from my crew," she paused, her expression thoughtful. "It's difficult, but I am grateful for your kindness. Without it, I would not be here." Jacob scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, we're not completely heartless. I mean, Max isn't. I'm still deciding." Max chuckled. "Come on, Jacob. You've warmed up to her. Admit it." Jacob rolled his eyes. "Maybe a little. But don't let it go to your head, Velik." She smiled faintly. "I won't." As the conversation continued, the mood in the room lightened. They shared stories of their respective homes, Max and Jacob talking about Earth's sprawling cities and lush landscapes, while Velik described the vast, intricate habitats of her people. Despite their differences, they found common ground in their desire to make something of themselves, to push boundaries and explore the unknown. By the time the evening ended, Jacob's earlier skepticism had faded further. Max could see it in the way he joked with Velik, in the way he no longer kept his distance. The walls between them were coming down, slowly but surely. The next morning, Jacob approached Max in the maintenance bay, his expression serious. "You know, she's not half bad. Sharp, resourceful, maybe we were lucky to find her." "Glad to hear you're coming around," Max said, though he kept his tone light. "Told you she wasn't a threat." Jacob sighed. "Yeah, well, don't let it go to your head." Max grinned. "Wouldn't dream of it." As they worked together to install the new air filtration system, Velik joined them once again. She didn't say much at first, just watched and occasionally offered a suggestion. But when Jacob ran into a snag with one of the connections, she stepped in without hesitation. "Here," she said, pointing to a secondary conduit. "If you reroute the flow through this line, it will bypass the blockage and maintain pressure." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Positive," Velik replied. "I've seen similar configurations before." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, let's try it." With her guidance, they resolved the issue quickly. Jacob gave her a small nod of approval. "Good call." "Thank you," Velik said simply. As the day went on, the three of them worked side by side, their movements in sync. Max couldn't help but feel a growing sense of camaraderie. They were no longer just two humans and an alien. They were a team united by the challenges they faced and the solutions they found together. By the time their shift ended, the station was one step closer to being fully operational. More importantly, their trust in each other had deepened. They didn't need to say it out loud, it was clear in their actions, in the way they relied on each other without hesitation. Max sat cross-legged on the deck of the station's central operations room, surrounded by a tangle of wiring and half-installed panels. Jacob knelt nearby, balancing a diagnostic tablet on his knee while Velik leaned against a console, watching them work. The hum of the station's systems filled the air, a subtle reminder that their habitat was far from complete. "This junction is shot," Max muttered, holding up a scorched component. "No wonder the comm system's been acting up." Jacob glanced at the component, then at his tablet. "We have spares, right? They're in cargo bay too." "Yeah, I'll grab one," Max said, pushing himself to his feet. "Velik, want to give me a hand?" Velik nodded and followed him down the corridor. As they walked, Max glanced over at her. She looked more comfortable here now, less guarded, more at ease in her surroundings. Even Jacob seemed to have warmed up to her over the past week. "You're fitting in pretty well," Max said as they turned a corner. "I hope so," Velik replied. "You and Jacob have been kind to me. I only wish to repay the kindness." Max smiled. "You're doing more than enough." Jacob might grumble, but he appreciates your input. "And well, I'm just glad you're here. Makes the work go faster." Velik tilted her head, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "Then I am glad to be here as well." They reached the cargo bay and Max rummaged through a storage crate until he found the replacement component. As he handed it to Velik, he noticed her looking around the bay with a curious expression. "What's on your mind?" he asked. "This station," she said slowly, "it's remarkable. Not just the technology, but the way you and Jacob have built it together. You work well as a team." Max chuckled. "You think so? Sometimes it feels like we're just fumbling our way through." "Perhaps," Velik said, "but you share a connection. That is something my people value highly. Working in harmony with others is a strength." "Well, we've had plenty of practice," Max said. "Jacob and I have been working together for years. It's not always easy, but we've learned to trust each other." Velik nodded thoughtfully. "Trust is not always easy to come by. It must be earned. And you're earning it," Max said, meeting her gaze. "I trust you, Velik. So does Jacob, even if he won't say it outright." She seemed taken aback for a moment, then smiled softly. "Thank you, Max. That means more than I can say." They headed back to the operations room, where Jacob was still tinkering with the diagnostic tablet. When he saw them return, he set the tablet down and crossed his arms. "About time," he said, though there was no real irritation in his voice. "You get lost on the way?" "Not at all," Velik said, handing him the replacement component. "We were simply taking a moment to appreciate the station's construction." Jacob snorted. "Appreciate it all you want, as long as it works." Max laughed. "Jacob, one day you'll admit we're doing a good job." "Maybe," Jacob said, though his lips twitched in what might have been the beginnings of a smile. They worked together to install the new component, the three of them moving almost in sync. It was becoming a pattern. Max's careful planning, Jacob's technical expertise, and Velik's fresh perspective. Each brought something different to the table, and together they were steadily transforming the station into a fully operational outpost. As they finished the repair, Jacob leaned back and let out a satisfied sigh. "There. Should be good to go." Velik studied the console, her expression thoughtful. "You humans have a way of making even the most chaotic situations work. It's admirable." "Admirable, huh?" Jacob said, raising an eyebrow. "Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," Velik said simply. "You are both skilled and resourceful. I am grateful to have learned from you." Max glanced at her, noting the sincerity in you completely, but you've earned a spot on the team. Velik's expression softened. "I appreciate that, Jacob." They worked for another hour, double-checking the system's stability and ensuring everything was running smoothly. By the time they called it a day, the comm system was fully operational, and the station felt a little more complete. That evening, the three of them gathered in the observation lounge. Jacob sat in a battered chair, nursing a mug of coffee, while Max stood by the window, gazing out at the asteroid field. Velik leaned against the wall, her posture relaxed. "So, Velik," Jacob said, breaking the silence. What's the first thing you'll do when you get back to your people? Velik considered the question for a moment. I'm not sure. I suppose I'll report what I've seen here. My people will want to know what I learned from humans. Perhaps I'll suggest more cooperation in the future. Cooperation, Jacob said with a smirk. Now there's a concept. You sure your people are ready for that? I hope so, Velik replied. There is much we can learn from each other. Max turned from the window. And what about you? What do you want to do? Velik hesitated, her gaze shifting to the stars outside. I'm not certain. This experience has changed my perspective. I think I'll need time to decide what comes next. Well, Max said, whatever you choose, I'm glad you ended up here. We're better for it. Jacob raised his mug in a mock toast. Here's to unexpected allies. Just don't make us regret it. Velik smiled, a small but genuine expression. I will do my best. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the vast expanse of space stretching out before them. Despite the challenges they faced, there was a sense of quiet accomplishment, a feeling that, together, they could handle whatever came next. The station was almost unrecognizable from the day Max and Jacob first arrived. What had started as a basic framework in a cold, remote asteroid field was now a fully functional outpost. The power grid was stable, the life support systems were running smoothly, and they even had a rudimentary hydroponics bay producing fresh greens. As they moved through the corridors, the hum of efficient machinery and the soft glow of functioning displays made the place feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a true home. Max and Jacob were in the central maintenance bay, making adjustments to the thermal regulators. The job wasn't particularly complicated, but it required close monitoring to ensure the heat distribution stayed even across all modules. Velik stood nearby, her sharp eyes fixed on the control panel. That temperature gradient looks off, she said, pointing at the display. The eastern modules are running warmer than the rest. Jacob frowned. Didn't we just balance that last week? We did, Max replied, tapping a few keys. But the thermal regulators have been a little finicky since we added that new storage module. I'll recalibrate it. As he worked, Velik stepped closer. Let me assist. I have experience with heat distribution systems. Jacob smirked. More unsolicited advice? Velik gave him a measured look. If you would prefer, I can remain silent. No, Jacob said quickly, holding up his hands. By all means, show us what you've got. Velik leaned over the panel, her claws deftly adjusting a set of parameters. Within moments, the gradient evened out and the temperature readings stabilized. Max raised an eyebrow, impressed. Okay, I'll admit it, Jacob said, crossing his arms. You do know your stuff. I wouldn't offer advice if I didn't, Velik replied calmly. Max chuckled. Well, don't stop now. We've still got a lot to do. Later, as they walked through the station's corridors, Max glanced over at Velik. You've been a big help these past few weeks. I don't know how we would have finished this place without you. Velik tilted her head. You would have managed. Your people are resourceful. Maybe, Max said, but it wouldn't have been nearly as efficient. And honestly, I'm glad you're here. It's good to have someone with your perspective. Yeah, Jacob added, surprising them both. You've made things easier. Just don't let it go to your head. Velik smiled faintly. I'll try to remain humble. As they entered the hydroponics bay, Jacob surveyed the rows of leafy greens growing under the artificial lights. Remember when we first set this up? I didn't think it'd work. Because you didn't trust my design, Max said. No, because the pumps kept failing, Jacob shot back. But I'll give you credit. It turned out all right in the end. Max grinned. Coming from you, that's high praise. Velik picked a small leaf and studied it. You've created a sustainable food source. That's no small feat. It's not perfect, Max said, but it's a start. Jacob snorted. A start that means we don't have to eat those freeze-dried meals anymore. I'll call that a win. They worked together for the next hour, checking the nutrient levels in the water and ensuring the lighting cycles were set properly. Velik watched closely, occasionally offering suggestions or pointing out small adjustments that improved efficiency. Max and Jacob found themselves relying on her more and more, not just for technical help, but for her insight into problem-solving. All right, Jacob said finally, straightening up. That's good for now. Let's take a break. The three of them gathered in the station's observation lounge. It had become their unofficial meeting spot, a place to unwind and talk after long hours of work. Jacob stretched out on the small sofa while Max leaned against the window, staring at the asteroid field outside. Velik sat in one of the chairs, her posture relaxed. So, Jacob began, Velik, what's the first thing you'll do if you ever head back to your people? Velik hesitated, her gaze shifting to the stars. I don't know, she said softly. My life was very structured before I came here. This experience has changed how I see things. I'm not sure I can simply return to my old routines. Not a bad thing, Max said, turning toward her. Sometimes a change in perspective can open up new possibilities. Possibilities? Velik murmured, as if testing the word. Yes, I suppose that's true. Jacob raised an eyebrow. So you're saying we've rubbed off on you? Perhaps, Velik said, a hint of a smile on her lips. You humans have a way of adapting to unexpected situations. It's admirable. Admirable, Jacob repeated, pretending to be shocked. Now I've heard everything. Velik's smile grew slightly. Don't let it go to your head. Max chuckled. See, Jacob? She's got your sense of humor now. Great, Jacob said, rolling his eyes. That's just what I need. Another smart aleck around here. They laughed, the tension of the past few weeks easing. For a moment, it didn't matter that they were light years from home or that they'd started this mission with more questions than answers. They were a team now, and that made all the difference. Later that night, Max found himself back in the maintenance bay, running one final diagnostic before turning in. He wasn't surprised when Velik joined him. You don't sleep much, do you? She asked, leaning against the console. Not when there's work to be done, Max replied. What about you? I rest, Velik said. But I also think there's much to consider. Max set down his tools and turned to face her. Like what? Velik was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the floor. Like what this place means. What I've learned here. What it means to connect with others. You've been through a lot, Max said gently. It's okay to take your time figuring things out. I know, Velik said, meeting his eyes. But I want you to know that I am grateful. For everything. Max smiled. We're grateful for you too. This station wouldn't be the same without you. Velik's expression softened. Thank you, Max. That means a great deal. As they stood there, the faint hum of the station's systems around them, Max felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. They'd built something special here. Not just the station itself, but the trust and friendship that had grown along the way. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to relax. Come on, he said, gesturing toward the corridor. Let's call it a night. Tomorrow's another busy day. Velik nodded, and they walked back to the living quarters together, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. The familiar hum of the station's power systems underscored another long day of work. Max, Jacob, and Velik stood in the hydroponics bay, inspecting the water filtration system that had been acting up again. The rows of leafy greens basked under the bright lights, their vibrant color a stark contrast to the sterile metal walls around them. Max knelt beside the tank, adjusting a valve while Velik observed from a few feet away. This should stabilize the flow, he said. Let's see if the pressure levels out. Jacob, leaning against the nearby control panel, watched the readouts. Looks better. It's not fluctuating as much. It still might be too high, Velik said, her eyes narrowing at the gauge. If it exceeds that threshold, the pump could fail. Max sighed and gave the valve another slight twist. What about now? Velik stepped closer, tilting her head to study the numbers. Better. I think that should hold. Good, Jacob said. Because I'm not in the mood to rebuild this thing from scratch. Max smirked. I'll take that as a compliment. Jacob rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Sure, why not? Velik's gaze lingered on the tank for a moment before she turned to them. You've made great progress here. This entire station, it's impressive. My people would find it inspiring. Jacob quirked an eyebrow. Inspiring, huh? That's a first. Velik's expression didn't change, but there was a softness in her tone. It's not easy to create something so functional and efficient in such a harsh environment. I admire what you've accomplished. Max stood, brushing his hands on his coveralls. It wasn't just us. You've been a big part of this too. We wouldn't have come this far without your help. Jacob nodded, though his usual skepticism lingered in his voice. True. You're pretty sharp when it comes to problem solving. Thank you, Velik said simply. For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, the only sound the quiet gurgle of water circulating through the system. Later, in the station's central operations room, the mood was less relaxed. A proximity alarm had gone off, signaling a small vessel approaching their position. Max stared at the monitor, his brow furrowed. "Any idea who it is?" Jacob asked, leaning over his shoulder. "Not yet," Max said. "It's not transmitting any known ID codes." "It could be one of your AGC ships," Velik suggested. "Maybe," Max said, his tone uncertain. "But they usually announce themselves right away." Jacob straightened, his hand resting on the back of Max's chair. "So what's the plan?" Max glanced at Velik, then back at Jacob. "Let's keep it quiet. If they don't know we're here, we might be able to avoid any trouble." Velik frowned. "If they detect my presence?" "We'll deal with it," Max interrupted. "You're part of this team now. We're not throwing you under the bus." Jacob nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, we'll figure it out." Velik hesitated, then said softly, "I don't want to cause problems for you." "You won't," Max said firmly. "We've got this." The approaching vessel came into view on the external cameras. It was a small, nondescript craft, not AGC, but not obviously hostile either. Max, Jacob, and Velik watched as it slowed to a halt just beyond the station's outer perimeter. "Still no transmission," Jacob said, his arms crossed. "What are they waiting for?" Max tapped a few buttons, cycling through the camera angles. "No visible weapons. No signs of damage. They're just sitting there." Velik leaned closer to the monitor. "They might be scanning us." "Great," Jacob muttered. "Just what we need." Max frowned, then turned to Velik. "Any chance it's one of your people?" "I don't recognize the design," Velik said. "But that doesn't mean it's not." "Okay," Max said, thinking quickly. "If they contact us, we'll play it cool. Keep the conversation short, stick to the story that we're a remote research station, and don't mention anything about you." Velik nodded. "Understood." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they waited. Finally, the ship's comm signal activated. A voice crackled over the speakers, speaking a language Max didn't recognize. "What the hell is that?" Jacob asked, his brows drawing together. "It's Adar," Velik said quietly. "They're asking for permission to dock." Max and Jacob exchanged glances. "They're your people?" Max asked. "I don't know," Velik replied, her expression unreadable. "But they are speaking my language." "All right," Max said, turning back to the console. "Let's hear what they have to say." After a brief exchange, Velik confirmed that the ship was indeed Adar, but their crew was not part of her original team. Instead, they were a small, independent group conducting reconnaissance in this sector. They claimed to have detected unusual energy readings from the station and had come to investigate. "They seem curious rather than hostile," Velik told Max and Jacob. "They want to know who you are and what you're doing here." "We stick to the research station story," Max said. "We're conducting long-term habitat testing isolated from Ajax's main operations." Velik nodded and relayed the explanation. The Adar crew accepted it without much resistance, though their tone remained cautious. "They're asking for permission to dock and share information," Velik said after a pause. Jacob frowned. "Is that a good idea?" "I think it's better to cooperate," Velik said. "If we refuse, they might become suspicious." Max considered it for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but we keep them on a short leash. No wandering around the station unsupervised." Jacob sighed. "This just keeps getting better." When the Adar crew boarded, they moved cautiously, their reptilian features similar to Velik's but their demeanor more reserved. The leader, a tall figure named Taver, introduced himself and his two crewmates. Their eyes swept over the station's corridors and equipment, taking in every detail. Max maintained a polite but firm tone. "Welcome. As Velik explained, this is a research outpost. We're testing long-term habitat systems in remote environments." Taver nodded. "It is unusual to see humans so far from your established colonies. Your work here is intriguing." Jacob stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching closely. Velik stayed near Max, her presence seemingly putting the Adar crew at ease. As they moved to the station's main conference room, Max and Taver discussed technical details, power generation, waste recycling, and hydroponic cultivation. The Adar crew seemed genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions and offering suggestions based on their own experiences. Jacob couldn't resist muttering under his breath. "Who knew we'd be giving a guided tour to aliens?" "Just play nice," Max said quietly. Velik glanced at Jacob, her voice barely audible. "They mean no harm. They're simply curious." "Let's hope it stays that way," Jacob replied. By the end of the meeting, the Adar crew appeared satisfied. They thanked Max, Jacob, and Velik for their hospitality and promised to share any relevant findings with their own community. As they prepared to leave, Taver turned to Velik. You have adapted well here, he said. It is not easy to live among another species. Velik nodded. I have learned much from them. They have been generous. Tavor inclined his head. That is good. Perhaps one day our peoples will find common ground. Perhaps, Velik said, though her tone held a hint of doubt. After the Adar crew departed, Max and Jacob exhaled in unison. Well, Jacob said that was something. Could have been worse, Max said. At least they weren't hostile. Jacob snorted. Yeah, but I'm not putting out a welcome mat just yet. Velik stepped closer to Max. Thank you. You handled that well. Max gave her a small smile. We handled it. All three of us. She met his gaze, a flicker of warmth in her expression. Yes. Together. Jacob rolled his eyes. All right, enough with the warm fuzzies. Let's get back to work. As they returned to their routine, the station seemed quieter than before, as if the departure of their unexpected visitors had left a subtle void. But the three of them, Max, Jacob, and Velik, had grown stronger as a team. They had weathered another challenge, and though the future remained uncertain, they knew they could face it together.